All right. Thank you all so much for joining or watching later, whatever it may be. I like to take artist talk opportunities to, rather than sort of like list achievements or describe something from after an achievement, I'd like to talk about the many experiences that have led to those things happening. And yeah, in my perspective of life, I have for a while believed that many of us artists choose the paths that we do in art as a means of responding to or rectifying certain experiences or conditions of our lives, almost like a search to figure that out or something. And so I'm not going to start the entire story at the age that I am in this picture. This is me and my brother. But I will talk about sort of coming to an awareness of financial instability from a very young age, and how that, I believe, has formed a majority of the work that I've done in art, in education, in book publishing. And yeah, so I think for the beginning, I'll just share one of my earliest memories. It's probably an afternoon in first grade. I was coming home from school, dropped off by the school bus, and going in to make an afternoon snack for myself. And the phone rang, and as it rang, I was being waved to by one of my parents to not answer it. The reason they were doing that was because it was a debt collector looking to collect a debt. And me being a child, I interpreted it as a game that I thought we were playing, like peekaboo. And so I picked it up and I said, yes, they're right here. And was then, there was disappointment expressed for my response to that call. And when I reflect on that memory, I feel that, while that was the earliest that I can remember, this sort of atmosphere of that instability has informed a lot of the changes throughout childhood and adolescence into adulthood, and still to today, of just how a lot of that still forms the way that I think about my life. And while a lot of that has been very inconsistent, one consistency has been my brother and our relationship. This is Free and I on a road trip of many. But I think where I'll start this entire story is in Ireland. In the fall of 2008, I managed to find a way to study abroad there at a place called the Burren College of Art, which is on the West Coast. It's a very small college. I think at that time it was max capacity and there was 22 students from undergrad to PhD. And the study abroad person knew of my financial situation and helped me find a way to afford it very easily. And yeah, so when I arrived, this is me having climbed the, I call it a mountain. A lot of people say that's not a mountain, behind the college. And this is on my birthday, on my 22nd birthday, that I took this self-portrait. I went to school for photography at Columbia College Chicago. And so I temporarily dropped out of Columbia College Chicago to go to school here. That was one of the ways in which it was affordable. And that night, I went to the grocery store to buy a bottle of wine for my birthday, and my credit card was declined because they're not my credit card, my bank account. It was declined because the money had been taken out of my account. What I learned on that day was that my dad had been evicted and needed the money to buy a truck, to move things, and to pay for tarps and things like that. I, hearing this news, was in a complicated emotional moment of having arrived at this beautiful place, kind of paradise for an artist, while also hearing this tragic news. And so what I did for my photography class that I, still needed to pass is I took self-portraits in the burn. And, at first took just self-portraits with like a fishing line, and later friends would help me out and take the picture for me. But just sort of wandering the landscape, not exactly in the most social headspace at the time, and making these self-portraits to turn into class. All the while I was in communication with my dad, and he was sending me cell phone pictures from the eviction. And the reason why I include this as the beginning of this story, because it was the first thing that I ever made that resembled a book. At the end of my time in Ireland, I made just sort of like a little photo album of all of these pictures together. And I also just see it as one of the first times that I started thinking critically about, what I want art to do for myself, or what I want to share or talk about. And yeah, this was a very transformative moment in my life. I feel that previous to this time, I wasn't really asking many questions about anything. And this was sort of the beginning of curiosity, and also just my relationship to being alive, I would say. When I left Ireland, I received a grant from the Illinois Arts Council to continue that work. And so I began photographing just my life at home as it was unfolding once I got back to the States. And this is a picture of where my dad was sleeping after he was evicted, in a church parking lot, because he said people wouldn't bother him there. And just making documents of the world around me as it was happening. I think it was in April of that year, my mom's boyfriend was diagnosed with cancer. This is Richie, and he was given, I think, 4 months to live. His father figure, Uncle Joe, who had become like a role model of mine, passed away due to a falling accident on his back porch. And my cousin Mark was killed in a car accident at age 19. And this was all in the months coming back from Ireland. And this is Richie, probably a month and a half before he eventually passed away the following year. As I was making this work, I was also graduating from college. It was my last semester, and I was basically making these pictures as well as writing, more of a therapy than any sort of plan. I didn't really have any plan. I was pushed a lot to make a book of it, which I eventually did, but over a year later. But yeah, it was just a stack of pictures, but for graduation. And these are the pictures from that project. Throughout college, I was able to travel quite a lot. I had like a 92 Honda Accord, and we ran it into the ground. But traveling was sort of just a huge element of how I was interacting with life at that time. I was living with a few of my best friends, one of them being Victor Yanez Lascano. This is Victor in front of his first lobster. We were living together in Bridgeport, and one morning he woke up and asked me, "Have you ever eaten a lobster before?" And I said, "No." And he was like, "Me either. Should we drive to Maine to eat a lobster?" And so that's what we did. And this is him before that. And so inspired by Victor, I was really interested in sort of escaping, especially after all of the death and transition of the past year. And so I used my last access at Columbia College to print off a couple zines and raise enough money to go on a trip myself. I had never traveled alone, so I was interested in doing that. And so I raised enough money to do that and started my trip. And these are pictures from that trip. One of the aspects of that trip was that I went to Acre Artist Residency in the first year that it existed and met a couple of really important people in my life. This is E.J. Hill. He was my roommate at Acre. And this is Brandon Elbandia, who I think was across the hall. But I made really strong connections with them both, which led to a lot of the evolution of my work. On the way back from that trip that I took by myself, Brandon asked me if I would like to publish a book of that work that I made on the trip. And I was really psyched about it and flattered. His press was called Silver Galleon Press, which was like a really low budget DIY publishing project. And so we used recycled materials and really tiny budget. I again used the last access of Columbia to make some prints, and we just made 25 books. The book is called Talking with Fear About Dying Tomorrow. And me, Brandon, and his wife, Angel, made these in one night and did the book release the next day. But basically just was an object that represented everything from my trip. All of the photos, all of my writing, and all of the stuff that I found in the back of my car made into new pieces. I also started collaborating with EJ pretty significantly. We were making books together and making exhibitions together. And we still do that. This is our first and second editions. The first one I did, and the second edition Matt Avignon did. Just of me and EJ's poetry, writing, and photography. EJ, when I met him at Acre, he taught me how to tune a guitar. And so I started teaching myself how to play guitar. I don't know how to play really, but I noodle. And we started a project together called The Mountain Was a Gift, which was improvisational music sort of curriculum project where we would teach classes mostly on just focusing on people connecting with one another, and sort of, it's almost like musical chairs, but connecting with people emotionally. And we did that quite a lot for a while. This is in EJ's apartment. We did a session at Acre the next year. We did summer camp in Maine, the University of Chicago Education Department. And all throughout this, my main form of employment was freelance labor contractor work, mostly painting, fixing walls, hanging artwork, building or fabricating things for an exhibition that isn't art. And you'll see throughout this talk that it is probably the most important educational experience of my life, these jobs. When I started these jobs, I didn't know how to use anything, a hammer, a drill. I truly got the job knowing absolutely nothing, and learned everything through these jobs. Oftentimes, like this picture shows, I would work with my brother or with Victor or with a number of other close friends. And so, you know, as laborious as the job could be, it was pretty much always a lot of fun. And that has been a constant form of employment throughout everything. I was also starting to teach both artist books and but primarily photography at that time, mostly to high school students. And my favorite part about teaching was that I could connect my students directly to my peers who were active in making work or curating or publishing. This is a group of students watching one of EJ's performances. This is Tempest Hazel of 60 Inches from Center teaching my artist books class about online journalism. And around this time, I was one of a number of founding members of a project called Latitude, which is a community digital lab in Chicago, which just turned 10 this year. Similarly to so that's Victor cutting steel down in Latitude to build the tables for Latitude. Me and Victor collected that steel from a job at the Holocaust Museum when one of our job duties was to throw it out. And so we kept it and it became the Latitude desks and tables, which I believe are still, some of which are still in there. And this steel is sort of in all of our homes as furniture. Latitude opened and in this space and immediately started off with public programming like shown here, and has continued for 10 years. I was also continuing to work these jobs. The Holocaust Museum in Skokie was probably one of the most consistent. And around that time, me, Victor, and Riley stopped living together because of a case of bed bugs. And I moved into an apartment that was offered to me through a friend. And I accepted. And immediately upon moving in, I realized that this apartment was like way too big for one person. And so I wanted to share it, or share some of the space with the community. And so one of the first things I did was I built a dinner table that seats 10 people. Again, I learned these practices through these labor jobs. And at the same time that I moved into there, I received a grant to make a book of that project that I was showing you before about my family. And I learned very quickly that $1,500 will not generally, you can't really pay people $1,500 to make a book edition for you. So I learned from this man, Sage Reynolds on YouTube, how to do pretty much all the bookmaking that I know. I highly suggest Sage's channel. So I made a book called Wake of that project, and made that entirely by hand in the apartment. I only had enough money to make 10 copies of the book, and I wanted to find a way to expand the reach of that project more than 10 people. And so I was thinking that I could sort of build a structure where people could pass it on and it would be reflected, the journey would be reflected in the project. And so I gave half of that grant to a close friend, Trev, McNaughton, and he built a website for people to track the books. And so this is him presenting it. I hosted a dinner in the apartment to first give them away. And these were 10 people that all knew me that didn't know one another. So it was like my first philosophy professor, my boss at the Holocaust Museum, some close friends from different circles, and my brother. And so we handed them out, and I made everybody dinner. And this is the website that Trev made to reflect those books traveling. And so at this point, I don't know anybody that still has them, except for the University of Iowa Rare Books Library. They contacted me and said that they kept it. And yeah, the dinners I continued, and the project sort of developed into a name that was called The Perch. And these dinners would be thematic. So there would be some prompt for people to consider, and then they would sort of present or respond to one another at the dinner while I fed everybody. And so the dinners became a consistent part of The Perch. And then as I was continuing to do these jobs, oftentimes with my close friends, on the nights and weekends, I would help friends make books just because I fell so in love with the process of making them. And so this is Victor in the sort of first version of the studio at The Perch. And the first official book that we made, like a bigger edition, was Todd Dieterich's Luminous Flux. And the idea behind The Perch is basically that anybody can come and learn how to make books by doing the edition. And then through that process of learning, we produce around 50 handmade books that are super nice. I was funding the printing and the materials with grants that I was winning in the city and in the state. And then as a sort of forward pushing of the grant, the artist who was published would receive 100% of the sales of the book. And so it would sort of end up amplifying the grant through this process. By the end of The Perch, there was a team of 10 volunteers, all friends, and we sort of used it in different ways in terms of different interests in our careers and stuff like that. So the funding that I received for The Perch was $12,800, and we paid out $47,000 from 18 book editions. You'll see that it ends in 2015. That's because Bruce Rauner was elected governor, and sort of the way in which we were getting funding was slashed from the state budget. And so I started coming up with different plans. All throughout this, I was still doing the labor jobs, and then through the labor jobs, collecting materials to use for different things for The Perch. So these are library shelves from the Regenstein Library at the University of Chicago. It was one of my jobs to throw them out, and I kept them and turned them into benches that I invited people to engrave in. It's like veneered particle board, so when you engrave it, what you write is really pronounced. And so anybody that ever came in The Perch or collaborated with The Perch would make their engraving. Eventually, my brother moved in to The Perch, and we were living there and running the project together. And utilizing the skills that we learned from the labor jobs, we sort of renovated the apartment ourselves and made it more of a community space and a bindery than an apartment. So you recognize that steel again from the Holocaust Museum. And there's Jono. And yeah, we built the space out to sort of be more accommodating to the project. Eventually, institutions started becoming interested in The Perch. This is Michael Cristiano and Eric Peterson of the Smart Museum. and they invited me to do a perch project in their lobby. And so I built with those same reclaimed shelves, an office in their lobby, which invited anybody to engrave into the walls, while I held like office hours and would bind notebooks in the space as well. And eventually this culminated into a book that we made and gave back to the Smart Museum. Also, the MCA asked us to be a part of their Word Weekend event, where we sort of built a perch on their back terrace, which we saw as like a classroom. So there was hourly classes that people could attend in that space. And my brother and I were also invited to do an installation in the atrium, where we installed like an office basketball hoop with a backboard that said, "You got this," and then 5,000 sheets of paper that said, "I got this," and invited people to shoot as much as they want. That same summer, my brother and I got invited to help with Acre. They always need help with setup. And so you go out and you just work on whatever needs working on. And the property owner had left open a door for the winter, which basically created a giant birdhouse out of their upstairs attic space. And so my brother and I were asked to basically clean all the bird shit out and refinish the floors and repaint the drywall. And so we did that. And when we were finishing, Bob, the property owner, came in and looked at our work, and he said, "You both can have free wood for life. Just call me," which we've done many times and filled our car many times. And that'll come into the story later. My brother then that fall went to the Burn College of Art as well to study. And that same fall, my mom was diagnosed with a rare kind of lung cancer. And fortunately, they caught it early enough that it could be cut out. And against the doctor's orders, my mom flew with me to Ireland to visit my brother and climb the mountain with us and stuff. But again, was a pretty intense time. I made a poster after that, sort of writing about the experiences that I was having, sort of witnessing my mom go through this, which began the process of me making a book of my own called The Shape of Spilled Milk. Again, this was like used with paper samples. What I learned through the perch is that if you sort of face as an institution, even though you might be just a person or a couple friends, if you face as a corporation, bigger corporations will just give you stuff for free. And so we got this really expensive paper for free as samples, which became the covers. And my buddy Ty screen printed the covers, and then I paid to get the interiors printed really cheaply. I released this book in a friend's bookshop in Los Angeles, which started them inviting me to be a part of their forthcoming bookstore project. And because we were running out of money at the time, because the grant's ending, I took this as a hope of being able to pay for the perch and keep it going. And I didn't realize when I got there that the space was totally raw. But just as I have in other cases, I took what I learned from the labor jobs and built out my space. And so this was supposed to be like my bookbinding area. That job was rescinded from me, and I didn't get to actually do it. And so I was hired as social media manager, which lasted 5 weeks, and then I left. And I got a job fabricating artwork for an artist, where I was hammering probably several hundred, if not over 1,000 nails a day, which led to a shoulder tendon injury 8 months later in Los Angeles. And then that sort of stopped me from working. And then this is my then partner, Allie, us talking through the jobs that we were really not feeling at the time and trying to come up with something else. And what that was Candor Arts, or the beginning of Candor Arts, which was really just, at the time, we were just thinking of anything that we could use as a front for our interests to sort of make something work for employment. And so this was like the first notes, the first page of notes that I ever wrote about Candor. And yeah, so what it was at first was just me making notebooks and boxes, and Allie curating different goods as well for an online shop, as well as sort of developing her interior design career. So the first Candor studio was a bedroom in Los Angeles. I built out the tables and desks in the studio, and I was pretty much making notebooks and boxes. Until Lakeisha Leak contacted me. Lakeisha and I had been introduced through Savannah Wood several years prior. And Lakeisha said, Lakeisha had just put up this show called How to Make a Hood at the Arts Incubator. And she was like, I don't have a lot of money, but can we make a book for this show? And this was sort of everything I was waiting for to work on. And so I was like, yeah, we'll use whatever amount of money and we'll figure it out. And so we made How to Make a Hood. And so I made these entirely by myself in my bedroom in Los Angeles. And it was a handmade edition of 50. And so, yeah, the books that were made in that LA bedroom were How to Make a Hood and Adam Grassi's Winter Quiet Tensions. We moved back to Chicago that February, I believe. And because I got a teaching job, which felt more stable and better than what I was doing. And so this was the next studio, which was our living room in Pilsen. And from that living room, I made Bye Bye Broadway, Moonwork by Alon Holt. And then our friend Andy Christ invited us into a building, again, raw. Basically, a landlord said, if you can fill this with artists, I'll put in a floor and plumbing. And so Andy got us in there and we shared rent. Again, built everything out, all the desks and furniture, and started a space called In-House, where we were just, so it was like Candor Arts, as well as Andy's Autotelic Studios, as well as Andy's individual creative practice at the time. And we ran it in this space. And so the next phase of Candor was that Andy moved out and I took over the space. Allie had fully begun pursuing her interior design job at that point, and so I was running Candor by myself. And basically then I shared the studio with a number of different people over the next couple of years. And I was still, primarily the income was these boxes and notebooks. And I was still working these labor jobs throughout it. It was me and Jesus Mejia. Katie Chung was the first official employee of Candor Arts. That was October 2016. This is us cheersing mozzarella sticks over lunch. And I believe the first book that she came on for was Victor Yanez's Day. This is just sort of giving you a sense of what the space looked like. Victor made this video. I still didn't know that much bookmaking stuff at the time. So it's a little bit cringe to watch this. But yeah. So that's Victor's book. We made 30 of those, and that was sort of used as a fundraiser for him to move to California to go to Stanford for grad school. The second official employee of Candor Arts was Justin Nally. Justin stepped in when Katie was making plans to teach in South Korea. And the projects we made in that studio at that time were the second edition of Moonwork, the second edition of How to Make a Hood. That's when Mel came, that's when I met Mel for the first time, was the night of the book release for How to Make a Hood. And Mel joined the team shortly after to work on Cecil McDonald's In the Company of Black. Hannah Batzel joined the team at the time of Sarah Winston's project, A Lick and a Promise. And then Mel became co-owner of the business shortly after we all met in Paris for Cecil McDonald being nominated for the Aperture Photo Book Prize. So these are the rest of the books made in that studio at that time. This is sort of what the studio looked like towards the end. And this is what it looked like at the very end, just overflowing boxes and running out of space for 4 or 5 people to work in there. And we moved to a storefront on North Avenue in Chicago, and again, built out the furniture and space. We were only in there for 10 months, and this is the projects that we made in there. There's Katie and Hannah. We would often have like classes and visitors in the space in the sort of front showroom area, which was really nice. This was also like just a time where this project was very overwhelming. I would say this is around the time where it started to take a toll on my mental health, primarily just attaching my self-worth to labor really seriously. And so sort of if I was feeling like I was disappointing people, I would sort of take it to heart really deeply. And that aspect sort of weighed on me pretty heavily until the end of Gander Arts. 10 months into this space, the ceiling started leaking very heavily, and we had to leave in an emergency out of that space. And so we moved into the Hubbard Street Lofts building, where there is Latitude, Filter Photo, Sputnik Press. And so we were among many similar projects. These are the projects that we made in that space. I haven't talked about this, but in line with the Perch, the function of the publishing of Candor Arts is that ultimately that the artist doesn't have to pay to be published. There is like a production budget that ends up getting paid off in sales, but that, you know, to be published, they don't have to pay. And that once there's a break-even point, that they would receive equal payouts of the funds. And so that was sort of the publishing model behind this. So at the height of the project, this was the team. And around the time of this picture, we were sort of trying to understand how we wanted to publicly face. You know, there was a lot of challenges between being really efficient team of 4 while also not wanting to be treated like robots or machines. And so, yeah, so that was a constant struggle. And around that time as well, just sort of overwhelmed by the amount that we were doing. That year was also very hard because our sales were mostly supporting the entire project before then, and sales had gone down pretty considerably in 2019. And so the project became much more difficult to sustain, and sort of every month was sort of going down in terms of financially. And so this was when Katie and Hannah were working on the Cincinnati Art Museum book. So when we were sort of acknowledging these sort of crises that were coming financially, I went to Ireland to sort of clear my head. Mel went to Munich to clear her head, and we sort of met up in Munich to discuss like what should we do about this sort of financial crisis that our business is hitting. And so through that meetup, we realized that after 4.5 years, roughly $745,000 had been provided to artists, both through free production costs or production costs that we fronted, as well as $225,000 in just cash payouts. Also that the network of people who had collected the book, or institutions that had collected the book, had reached over 150. And yeah, but we were also just trying to figure out how to make this work, because it was really hitting this sort of dead end point of operation where we just couldn't make enough money to keep it going. And so we asked Katie and Hannah to lower their hours by 1 day a week. And we tried that to see if it could get better. And then as soon as we tried it, COVID happened. And so at that point, you know, we were weeks away from zero. So we basically needed to end the project as we knew it at that point, but we still wanted to try our best to fulfill the projects that we were in the middle of. So yeah, that was sort of the end of the Candor team as we knew it at that point, though we all love each other still. And so me and Mel went on to produce the rest of the projects that we had basically promised to people. And so these are those. We began the shift from Candor Arts into the Candor Collective with a new transitional leadership team when they accepted their positions on August 3rd, which ended white leadership for the future of the project. And these are the remaining projects that we did in that studio. Again, speaking to that sort of issue of labor and how do we communicate it, and you know, how do we explain it? I made this film called Howie Edition, which shows the total time it takes to make one of these editions, or Raphael Soldi's Imagine Futures. So you can watch on our Vimeo if you want. It's 1 hour and 17 minutes. And yeah, so me and Mel continued, and while also exiting this space because we couldn't afford it anymore. The last studio that we had was an attic in a garage of a rock climbing gym where we finished the last of the projects. And so in that attic and gym, we produced Amanda Williams, The Other Option Is to Slow Down, as well as Something to Look Forward to for 60 Inches from Center, which was a zine subscription, which people could get for free, or they could pay between $0 and $60. And the idea was that through the Chicago winter, there would be something to look forward to, and people would get mailed incremental issues, 6 issues over the course of the winter. And then the very last commission that we ever did was Marshall Brown's The New Country, which was probably the craziest thing we've ever made, also made in that attic. So the online shop closed at the end of August. And that was sort of the end of the studio as we knew it. Since then, I've been living in Evanston and working from my living room and basement, mostly on furniture for friends. In this time, we had our first Candor Collective retreat. These are sort of the rules from that retreat, which is make time to rest, ask for help when needed, accept help when offered. We'll try our best to be present and give ourselves grace when we aren't. Honor one another's need to just be. Affirmation of each other's existence and efforts. Make room to see ourselves as whole human beings that is not connected to labor. At that retreat, the Candor Collective sort of demanded that I pay myself more through this project because I don't know what the max was before this, but it never amounted to more than $30,000 a year. And they sort of said, you have to pay yourself more. And so I've been doing that in this year in Evanston. It's been really nice. And that granted me the ability to go back to Ireland again and just write about this whole experience. So I've been working on a book called For the Birds Trapped in Airports that sort of attempts to answer the question, how did all of this happen, or how did this work happen, this career, if you could call it that. And so, yeah, I've been working on that. I've also been playing basketball with my brother. I was going to move to Berlin with Mel. In the last minute, there were some circumstances that prevented me and Kiki from joining. But Mel moved into a studio with Outer Space Press, who's an amazing publishing duo in Berlin. They're putting out incredible books right now, so I'd check them out. And Mel is stepping away from the collective to focus on her art career for now. And so since then, I've been working freelance contractor jobs again at the Holocaust Museum, and also working on, well, also Kiki and I got married recently, which was really exciting and wonderful. And we've recently made the decision that we are going to move to Los Angeles. I've also been making furniture for friends. This is my friend Cord, made this writing desk for them. And scheming with EJ in LA about a book that we're making for Mass MoCA coming up, as well as scheming about me moving to LA. Also, I got COVID. That's why we're wearing masks outside in a park. And then most recently, I've been trying to gather bindery equipment. This is my brother and my buddy Riley trying to lift a Kensal foil stamper into my Ford Fiesta. And so the next studio, I don't know where it's going to be yet. I'm actually leaving on Saturday to go to LA to start scoping commercial spaces. But this will be the resource for the collective, the studio resource. And yeah, and also just a new project. And it's sort of like the first studio project to be born from the new Candor Collective structure. And so the functions of the studio will be funding, producing, and publishing artist books and/or furniture editions, where the collaborators pay nothing, but they equally share all collective profits from the projects. So nobody makes more than anybody else. Everybody makes the same, but nobody has to pay to make their projects. Also, I'll be operating as like a permanent print production or publishing support for small organizations like the Candor Collective and 60 Inches from Center. We have a couple book projects lined up and continuing the relationship with Vivian Sming of Sming Books, as Candor Arts did in co-publishing before. And then here and there, I will, do design or produce books or furniture projects. But that'll be sort of the, like commissions will be the least prominent factor of the new studio. And yeah, so the upcoming books of the studio are my own, which you could pre-order now if you want. Cecil McDonald Jr.'s Heat of the Cool, something to look forward to over the next Chicago winter. Artists and Archives Case Studies in Collaboration, E.J. Hill's monograph from MassMocha, and Adam Grassi's next book, Yoga and Mood and Ocean View. The next exhibition for the Candor Archive will be at Sparkle Taffy, which opens on October 29th. That's Alex Valentine's gallery project outside of New Haven. And yeah, I just sort of wanted to end with a couple things. Something I've been trying to think more about as I reflect on my life and everything that's happened is just sort of thinking about that child self that was laughing and playing with the debt collector and trying to embrace that life perspective a little bit more, and just sort of let me be me, sort of as weird as it gets. And then this is one of the pages from one of the zines that my students made several years ago that I thought would be a nice endpoint for us. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. Would we like to open up the floor for some questions? We have a little bit of time. I'll let you make that call.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Great. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. You can post your question in the chat or just feel free to unmute. We have about half an hour left in our scheduled time. We definitely don't have to take the full half an hour. I don't have any questions prepared, so
That's
someone
okay.
feel free to go. Okay, I do have a question to get us started.
Yeah.
What are you most excited for in the next step?
I would say probably the ocean would probably be the number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
I feel you there.
I don't really have a question, but more just it's interesting because I feel like I got to know you somewhere maybe more around like 2018 or like 2017, like more thoroughly, and I thought I like knew quite a bit about you, and I feel like I just learned so much more.
Oh, cool.
And it's very interesting, and like I guess I'm just very impressed with like the wealth of information you just shared about like how you got to that place before I even met you. And yeah, I'm just impressed. I see a real question that just came in, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Thank you. Can you talk a bit more about the profit sharing idea structure of the collective? It sounds like such an ideal scenario for an art collective and it's very exciting. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, it's been, I mean, the Candor Arts and all these projects have been a huge experiment. Capitalism would love for us to just quit. I think that would be ideal for capitalism, but when we did Candor Arts, I think it was like we were just responding to different exploitative structures that exist in publishing pretty heavily. And we were just trying to respond with change to those aspects structurally. And I think after all said and done with our attempts at that, I think there was, although the sort of financial aspects were being responded to, the individualism, the competition were not being responded to. The equity was not being responded to. And when I say that, I mean like everybody had different budgets. Everybody had different payouts. You know, also that the Candor Arts was a white-led organization. And, you know, so as we were doing our project, we were trying to change these things as we're doing it. I think in the end, I think the biggest like sort of observation or takeaway that I sort of wish I could have changed would have been the competition. You know, everybody's trying to win the award or get the most sales, or and it doesn't help everybody, you know. It sort of creates a relationship between all of us where we're fighting for really small resources. You know, there's not a lot of money in any of this. And so, yeah, so I think the next evolution that we've developed is like, well, what if we just structurally made it to sort of take the idea of competing, and what if you made it financially beneficial to not compete, and actually promote each other and help each other. And so when people, you know, even if your books don't sell, but if theirs do, you know, you're still making money from that support. And yeah, so again, it's an experiment. Who knows how it'll go? I have no idea. Who knows? But yeah, that's sort of the next sort of structural change that we are working on, as well as making sure that the collective is never white-led from this point forward.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm really excited by it. I hope and think it will be really successful. I think that it's a really practical action to take in, you know, usually we're kind of like stuck operating, usually always we're stuck operating in the capitalist system we live in. And this just seems like such a practical way to create some change. Yeah, so awesome.
Thanks, Anna.
Any other questions?
I don't really have any questions, but I just wanted to say hi. And yeah, it was wonderful to hear you talk. And I felt the little undergrad college student in me really fanning out on the early Matt Austin photographs. I'm hoping to see more of that in the future, maybe.
Nice, Justin.
Good to
Thanks.
see you. Thank you
You
so
too, man.
much. I'm excited for the future of your life, and how much you've already given to Chicago, honestly, is just, well, all over the US, but a lot of Chicago is really incredible. So thank you.
Thanks, man.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, we can go ahead and wrap up, but thank you, Matt, so much for speaking about your work and your process. We all learned a lot. And if you are in New York or plan to be in New York, the exhibition, the Candor Arts Retrospective, is still up through the end of next week. So you can come check it out, as well as some of the other exhibitions we have currently on view. But they will all be going down in about a week and a half. So for more information about Center for Book Arts and just to see what we have going on, feel free to visit our website. We also have emails that go out most of the time promoting our workshops. So if you want to learn how to make books, you can. So yeah, that's pretty much it for us. Thank you again. And it was lovely hearing about your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Love you, Matt.
Bye. Thank you.